So first of all, we're so grateful that Dr. Tabin could be here tonight. Time change between California and here. So thank you very much, Dr. Tabin. So I have the pleasure of introducing him tonight. As you all may know, he's not only a world-class ophthalmologist, but he's also a world-class mountaineer. Dr. Tabin graduated from Yale University and then went on to earn a master's in philosophy at Oxford University on a Marshall Scholarship. From there, he attended Harvard Medical School. And along the way, he became the fourth person in the world to climb the highest peak on each of the 7 continents. He was even a part of an American team that made the first ascent of the east face of Everest. And after completing an ophthalmology residency at Brown and a fellowship in corneal surgery in Melbourne, Australia, Dr. Tabin then returned to Nepal, where together with Dr. Sanduk Ruit, they started the Himalayan Cataract Project to teach doctors in Nepal how to perform cataract surgery. And since then, the Himalayan Cataract Project has expanded to Project Cure Blindness, serves over 30 countries in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South America. So along with his continued devotion to that, Dr. Tabin currently serves as professor of ophthalmology and global medicine at Stanford University. And I do have to throw in at the end, he also invented bungee jumping. So Dr. Tabin, we really are so grateful to have you with us. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks so much. And it's an honor to be here. And I'm excited for all of you and what the future holds. Not so much for next Tuesday, but maybe the future after that and the long-term future in all of your careers. You guys are a little overall, just sort of summary of what I do and what I've done. But I'm going to kind of share my circuitous journey because I know a lot of you are first and second year medical students, some even third and fourth year medical students. And I think back to when I was your age, and the one little take home point is you don't want to ration the passion. Don't ration your passion. Find something you're passionate about. And I was just so fortunate and had so much serendipity, so much luck, so many great mentors. And I'm going to share a little bit about the circuitous journey that took me to where I am now. I have this sort of semi-legitimate job at university. I teach residents, I teach our fellows, and I currently spend about 4 months of the year between Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Between Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So let's see if I can advance. So I'm going to start out talking a little bit about climbing because it was really, it was one of my early passions. I did a lot of sports as a kid. My dad was a physicist on the Manhattan Project. He was on Enrico Fermi's experimental team in Los Alamos. And Fermi started him skiing during World War II. And my dad started hiking me up mountains and skiing pretty much from the time I could walk. And I started rock climbing when I was 13 or 14. And I never, ever thought, wow, I want to climb Mount Everest. And this is a picture of Everest from the north. It's the highest mountain in the world, 29,028 feet above sea level. And I'm just going to, the other than don't ration your passion, the other is just to, keep yourself open to serendipity and, follow where passion calls. Well, Everest is a 3-sided pyramid. It's on the border between Nepal and Tibet, or now China. 2/3 of the mountain is on the Chinese or Tibetan side, and 1/3 is in Nepal. And the mountain is actually called Chomolungma, or Goddess Mother of the Earth, by the people who live in the mountain's shadow. And the first outsiders to see Mount Everest were the British on their survey of India. And just using trigonometry up from the Bay of Bengal, they found the mountain to be within 20 feet of its actual height. And they called it Peak 15. Queen Victoria renamed the mountain Everest after Sir George Everest, who had been the Surveyor General of India. And the British, again, were the first with the audacity to think that perhaps Everest could or should be climbed. And the name is synonymous with the early explorations is the gentleman seated on the far left. His name was George Lee Mallory. And it's kind of exciting and interesting. A friend of mine his name is Jimmy Chin, last week found Mallory's climbing companion, A.C. Irvine's boot, part of his foot, and his sock, which melted out of the glacier 100 years later. And I'll get back to Andy Irvine in a couple of minutes, since he also does figure into my story. But the British in 1921 did a circumnavigation of the mountain. And those of you who are fourth year in maybe going to ophthalmology know how to read a topographic map of the cornea and look at keratoconus. Or if you hike in the Appalachia Trail, when you look at a topographic map, the closer together the lines are, the steeper the face. And so you can see by far the keratoconus of Mount Everest is the eastern side of Everest. It's the largest and steepest side. The easiest way to approach Everest is from the north, but you stay high for a long time. And that's where Mallory and his team decided was the only feasible route. The first ascent came along up through this. It's called the Western Coombe, from the south on the southeast ridge to the saddle between Lhotse, the world's fourth highest mountain, and Everest, and up this ridge to the top. And in 1921, Mallory looked at the eastern side of Everest and felt it was absolutely impossible. He concluded that other men, less wise, might attempt this way if they would, but emphatically it was not for us. And certainly for the climbing standard of 1921, it was absolutely impossible. And even when we went in the 1980s, it was a large step in technical difficulty over anything that had been climbed on one of the big peaks of the Himalayas. So Mallory went out to the north, and along with the Oxford undergraduate, Andy Irvine, they were seen by Colonel Noel Odell above this last little technical obstacle, moving towards the summit, and they disappeared into the clouds. And there's always been a controversy whether Mallory and Irvine made the summit. But if you climb, it doesn't really matter. Getting to the top is optional. Getting down is mandatory. Neither of them got down. About 10 years ago, an American climber named Conrad Anker found Mallory's body about right here. And that doesn't really answer the question of whether he fell off on the way up or on the way down. And he didn't have the camera. Andy Irvine had the camera, and it's out of the picture, but Jimmy Chin just a couple weeks ago found Irvine's body here. Again, it doesn't answer the question. So the first up and down ascent of Everest took place along this skyline ridge, past this called the South Summit, the last little technical obstacle called the Hillary Step, and onto the summit. That was done by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay Sherpa. That was in May of 1953, May 31st, 1953. And they made the first ascent. The Chinese, led by Wang Fu Chao, made the first ascent of the north route that Mallory was trying in 1960. And by the early 1980s, virtually every route on 2/3 of the mountain had been filled in. The mountain had been climbed in winter. It was first climbed without supplemental oxygen by Reinhold Messner and Peter Habler, but no outsider after Mallory had looked at the eastern side of Everest. Now, me, I was just a kid who liked to climb. And as you heard, I rock climbed quite a lot when I was in high school. And when I got to college, I increased my climbing. And this is the, does anybody know where this is? This is the mecca of climbing for the East Coast. And people from Baltimore or Washington, D.C. will drive here in about 4 hours. Can anybody shout out what this is? Big bonus points if you know where this is, and huge bonus points for the route.
Is it the Gunks?
It is the Gunks. Who said that? You're right. Whoever said that is right. And can you identify the route?
I'm gonna say, is it the classic one, like Welcome to the Gunks?
It's actually, it's interesting. It's Welcome to the Gunks. On the first ascent was actually the way that Welcome to the Gunks had its name was because Yvon Chouinard was trying to climb it, and he fell off, and he came to a stop about 5 feet above the ground. And one of the other Gunks locals named Jim McCarthy was walking by, and he said, "Welcome to the Gunks, Yvonne." And that was on the first ascent of Welcome to the Gunks. But no, they said, but actually, Yvonne Chenard was part of the first ascent of this as well. This is matinee.
Oh, nice.
Anyways,
Wow.
but anyways, I just like to climb. I really enjoyed it. I had sort of my little, group of friends in sort of the realm of climbing, but I never thought of the Himalayas. This was for, the people I read about in the magazines and in the books, and I just like climbing. My only early goal was going out to Yosemite and climbing big walls. And my partner and I, we were nowhere near the best two American climbers, but we were getting a little better, sort of always following the guidebooks. And by the time I graduated from college, I climbed 5 routes on El Capitan, and I, living on the East Coast, started climbing frozen waterfalls. It's one of the great routes in the Adirondacks. Huge bonus points. Anybody knows this one? It's called positive thinking in the Adirondacks. But I was always following a guidebook and knowing where I was going. And I applied to medical schools, and I was accepted to medical school. And at that time, my ideas were that I wanted to do something in sports physiology, high altitude medicine, or else orthopedic sports medicine. I did a little bit of moderate mountaineering in the Canadian Rockies and in the Tetons. But again, my whole focus at that time was going to medical school. I was excited to get into medical school. And then as the young soon-to-be Dr. Twist said, I was given this scholarship to go to Oxford University for 2 years. And it was an amazing, really transformative experience for me. I was able to really step back and think, why do I want to be a doctor? What am I doing? I had 2 years that were all expenses paid to do a master's degree in philosophy. And when I was in college, I was always kind of taking courses and trying to master the material, trying to get away, get to the climbing places. And I was always doing stuff. This was the first time I had the opportunity. The schedule was we would have a tutorial with tutors twice a week. And you have an open-ended philosophic question, and you would basically argue over, port or sherry, and discuss philosophic issues. And I really focused on the moral imperative behind medical delivery. And I really delved deeply into the disparities between the haves and the have-nots, both in terms of quality and access to care. But also, Oxford has this 8-week term and then a 6-week break, then an 8-week term, then a 6-week break, then an 8-week term, and then a 3-month-long vacation. So I essentially had 28 weeks of paid climbing holiday living in England. So I started taking the night train to the Alps, and I would schedule my tutorials on Thursday and Friday. And Friday night, I take the night train to the Alps, and I go to Chamonix or to Switzerland, and come back on the night train on Wednesday night. And I also found out that Oxford had these indigenous trust funds that were remnants of the time when Oxford students were exploring the world. And one in particular was called the A.C. Irvine Grant for Oxford students to enjoy a strenuous holiday in mountains abroad. And the vice master of my college, David Cox, controlled the purse strings. This was given in memory of Irvine, who had been an Oxford undergraduate when he died on Everest. And he said that the A.C. Irvine Grant for strenuous holidays in mountains abroad will give you much more money if you find something really interesting. So my partner and I started concocting sort of more remote locales. We started going to big walls and places people hadn't been. We got incredibly lucky with the weather, and we were able to make the first ascents of a few things that had not been climbed, and a couple of places where much better climbers than us had attempted, but the weather wasn't as good. And at the end of our time there, just to digress for a second to what Jimmy said about bungee jumping, we got a grant to go. This is the north face of Carstensz Pyramid, which had never been attempted. It's the highest point between the Andes and the Himalayas in Irian Jaya, New Guinea. And I was at a party. I used to hang out with a group that called themselves the Oxford Dangerous Sport Club. And sort of by the Hemingway token of there are only 2 sports, bullfighting and mountain climbing. Everything else is just a game. They were interested in finding new sport. And I was at a party and I mentioned I just received this grant to go climb this big wall in New Guinea. And the leader of the club, David Kirk, said, "Oh, Geoffrey, you're going to New Guinea. You must try vine jumping." And he was talking about a puberty ritual where they build these towers in the jungle and they tie vines to the ankles and people jump off, and the closer they come to the ground, sort of the better their post-puberty can be. And it actually wasn't really done in New Guinea. That was all he knew. It's actually done somewhere else. Anyone know where vine jumping was a puberty ritual? No one. Okay, so this is something I can actually teach the Hopkins students. I thought you guys were all so smart, I wouldn't be able to teach you anything, but it was Vanuatu, on the island of Vanuatu. But anyways, we came up over a drunken night with the concept of urbanizing New Guinea vine jumping. And one of the other members of the club, Alan Weston, had a brother who was in the RAF, and he knew these stretchy cords that we could use. So at about 3:30 in the morning, we went to the Iflington Air Force Base, and we permanently borrowed a few of these cords. And we, on April Fool's Day in 1979, did the first ever bungee jump. The only problem was we didn't have a good way to get back to the bridge. We were hanging for a while. We got photographed. The front page of the Daily Sun in England had a picture of us, and it said Oxford yo-yos. And then I wasn't actually looking into this digression, but since Jimmy brought it up, we ended up being on it. We repeated it again from the Royal Gorge Bridge for the TV show That's Incredible, and that was the start of bungee jumping. But anyways, we ended up getting really lucky again. We had just a phenomenal trip, and going into it was an area that was closed by the Indonesian government. They had discovered some copper mines in the area fairly near this mountain, and they were pushing some of the natives away. The natives were the Dani tribe. And it was just an incredible adventure just getting there. We got in illegally. We spent 10 days hiking through the jungle with the Dani tribe. And actually the least of the thing was climbing the actual mountain. But on our way out, we were found not to have a permit to be where we'd been. They thought we were some sort of spies or instigators. And so we were arrested. And so when I was due to matriculate at Harvard Medical School, I was actually incarcerated in Indonesia. And I came to medical school several weeks late. And my local medical school was like so kind, and they really kind of helped give me my own orientation and get me going. And then I got asked by the American Alpine Club to give one of the keynote lectures that year. And I spoke about our travels and really the adventure of going where we went in New Guinea. And lo and behold, one of my climbing heroes, those of you who climb might recognize the name George Lowe, said he was coming to the East Coast and would I like to go climbing with him. And at the end of a weekend where we climbed at the Gunks, where maybe I appeared to be a better climber than I was because we were climbing all routes that I had done several times, I got invited to go on the first American expedition to climb in Tibet, to make the first ever climbing attempt on the east face of Mount Everest. And I got so excited, and all my friends and climbing buddies all got so excited. Climbing all my heroes who I'd read about since I started climbing. The highest mountain I'd climbed up to that point was just 17,000 feet, Mount Kenya. I'd never been to the Himalayas. And now here I'm going to go with a team, this all-star American team, to the last unclimbed face on Everest. And it was fully sponsored by ABC Television Sports and National Geographic. It actually ended up being a cover story in National Geographic, and they were paying a year's tuition at Harvard Medical School to go climb. And I was so excited. I put in an application for a leave of absence. And this is one of those sort of things of serendipity. I got a phone call from a guy who said, "Is this Geoff Tabin?" And this is the east face of Mount Everest. And our route that we actually worked out was basically everything over here is just suicidal from avalanche danger. And this, just to give you perspective, this is 17,000 feet. This is 22,000 feet. So this is a vertical mile. El Capitan would be sort of about this big here. And so I put in for a leave of absence, and just a little bit of serendipity, I get a phone call from a guy who says, "Is this Geoff Tabin?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "You're an idiot." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "You're a complete moron. I think you're the dumbest person ever accepted to this medical school." And I said, "Who is this?" And he said, "Well, my name is Dr. Mike Weidman, and I'm on the committee looking at leaves of absence from Harvard Medical School. And there's no way, none, zero, less than that you would ever get a leave of absence to go climbing again. But anybody with half the intelligence to get into this school should know that if you apply to do research, Harvard will give you credit. And I'm an ophthalmologist interested in the effects of high altitude on the retinal vasculature, and in specific, whether we can look at high altitude retinal hemorrhaging as a prognosticator of high altitude cerebral edema. So let's forget about your leave of absence, and why don't we have dinner tomorrow night and talk about our research project?" So this was my research team, or the research lab. That was me back in 1983. That's George Lowe there. And this was my research project. I took photos of retinas. I had a fundus camera. I took picture of everybody's retina before the expedition. I took a picture of everybody's retina during the expedition. I took a picture of everybody's retina after the expedition. So I had 3 sets of photos, and I had 3 months credit at Harvard Medical School. We first had to work out a way up this big face, and climbing at this level of technical difficulty had never been done on a peak the scale of Everest. Started with about 1,000, 1,500 feet of fairly straightforward rock climbing. But then we had these very difficult, unconsolidated snow ridges that were very hard to get anchors in. And we had no native support on the mountain whatsoever. We're actually the only first ascent done on Everest with no native support. Then we had a big rock head wall. And actually, we had 9 out of 9 climbers all go above 25,000 feet without supplemental oxygen for the sake of my research. This is now Makalu, the world's 5th highest mountain, and Kinchenjunga in the back here, the world's 3rd highest mountain. And we ended up climbing the first ascent of the east face of Everest. That was 1983. Our route has never been repeated. It's still maybe the best team experience I've ever had. And every living member of the team gets together every 5 years for an amazing reunion in Yosemite. But I ended up having a lot of really great things come my way as a result of getting to the top of Everest in the 80s. And I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I still had, some idea I might do orthopedic surgery. I was trying to think of maybe I like pediatrics and maybe do something with pediatric orthopedics and crippled children, but I didn't really see a really great tie-in. And, if you operate on a kid and they get a bone infection, it's kind of fatal. So I was sort of looking for what to do, but I had so many incredible climbing opportunities. I stayed and actually did an internship, 1 year of orthopedic surgery, and then I got my mountain guide's license. And I spent the next couple of years mainly climbing. And then I was working in some refugee camps. I worked in a refugee camp in Goma, what was then Zaire. Now it's in the Congo. And then Sir Edmund Hillary, who I'd met actually on that 83 trip, had come and so like our special expedition advisor, and I met him prior to our 83 trip. And I used to see him in Kathmandu. And he's one of my heroes, not just for his climbing and exploration achievements, but really for what he's given back. And he built schools, he built hospitals, and really did incredible things to support the high hill people and mountain people of Nepal. And he asked if I would fill in as the doctor at a hill village called Faplu. It's not really on the tourist map, but it's a beautiful setting at about 10,000 feet. And I was the only doctor for a very large group of people, and it was very frustrating. Really exciting and rewarding in many ways, sort of being the doctor and taking care of that population. But also I had people die of things that would be so easy to care for in the West. People dying of simple infections, children dying of diarrhea. And I really saw that the way forward in to do anything in global medicine was really through a public health approach. And I had just finished filling out applications for PhD programs in public health. Actually, my first choice was to go to Hopkins, where Al Summer at the time was the dean of the School of Public Health and really focused on global health. And any of you know what Al Summer's big? I think he's professor emeritus there. Is he still at the School of Public Health?
He is. We have a hall named after him.
So do you know what his big contribution was?
The vitamin A.
Exactly. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Vitamin A and the correlation between vitamin A deficiency and childhood mortality, as well as blindness. But anyways, I was applying to PhD programs in public health when I saw the miracle of cataract surgery. And a Dutch team came in, and in our little catchment area, I had probably 30 or 40 blind patients. And there are no Meals on Wheels, there's no assistance for the blind. And it was just accepted that you get old, your hair turns white, then your eye turns white, and then you die. And when you're in a subsistence agrarian economy, having a blind person in the family is a huge burden. Actually, a Nepali name for a blind person is a mouth with no hands. And people would shrivel and be depressed and in the corner. And, it was just terrible. People look much older than their stated age. And I had never seen cataracts like this in my time in medical school. And then a Dutch team came in, led by a doctor named Jan Koch, and they did cataract surgery. And it was the craziest thing. People just blossomed back to life. They looked 20 years younger the next day. They were walking around. The joy it's hard to describe the joy of someone who's been blind for several years, all of a sudden seeing again and seeing perfectly after their cataract surgery. And I went, wow. And then I went back to Kathmandu. This was now 1989. And I saw that there was no one in Kathmandu and no one in the country of Nepal doing modern cataract surgery with lens implants. And I don't know if you know that the first recorded writing about surgery was from the ancient Sumerians, who described taking a small needle and going through the limbus at the side of the cornea and dislocating these cloudy cataracts. And if that went okay, people would go from only seeing light and dark, which is all this person would see, to being able to walk around. And the first real cataract surgery was written about by Dr. von Graefe in Germany in the 1870s. And he developed a knife called the von Graefe knife, which would basically fillet the eye open, and then he would take that whole lens out, but then there was nothing to focus. So people would have to use these thick Coke bottle-like glasses. And the big thing that changed cataract surgery and really ophthalmology was the advent of being able to replace the cloudy cataract with a lens that would give you really perfect focus. And anybody know who invented or discovered how to put a lens into the eye? His name was Harold Ridley, and became Sir Harold Ridley. He was an ophthalmologist in London, and in the 1950s, he had several patients who are RAF pilots who had the windshield blown into their eye, and it had remained inert for a number of years. So he postulated maybe I could make a lens replacement out of the windshield of a Spitfire aircraft. And so that was made out of polymethyl methacrylate, or PMMA. And he began experimenting, and his first experimental lenses, he was taking the whole lens out. There wasn't really a place to put the lens. And there was a lot of controversy. People at esteemed institutions like Mass Eye and Ear and the Wilmer Eye Institute refused to accept it. And it wasn't really until the mid-1970s that the design had become so good that people in America started readily using lens implants. By the 1980s, it was standard of care. But in a country like Nepal, it wasn't even thought of, because the least expensive of these lens implants on the world market in 1980 was $300. So it was absolutely prohibitive from a cost standpoint. And also in 1989, there were only 6 ophthalmologists in Nepal, and all of them were doing von Graefe's 1872 surgery. And the number one cause of blindness in Nepal was cataracts. The number 2 cause of blindness were eyes that were irreparably ruined from bad cataract surgery. The number 3 cause of blindness were people who had had the surgery but then lost the thick glasses and couldn't focus. So I got so excited. I came back to the States. And I called my old professor, Mike Weidman, and I said, you were right. I should have gone into ophthalmology. And I came back from Nepal in May, and he said, well, you know, I just heard yesterday that somebody had dropped out of the Brown program after were finishing their internship year. And let me see what I can do. But if you quit this, Geoff, I swear to God, I'll track you down and kill you. And I ended up coming back, deciding I wanted to go to ophthalmology in May, and July 1st, I started my residency. And the problem is still huge. You know, it's really, to me, it's just such a travesty that we still have 43 million blind people on our planet. And the crazy thing is that 85% of the blindness on Earth could have been prevented or could be treated. And half the blindness is from a completely treatable cataract. And the majority of people, of course, are in the low resource countries. And when you look at what's causing blindness or loss of vision, there's so much research money going into age-related macular degeneration. That's the number 1 cause of blindness in, you know, the high-income countries, the diabetic retinopathy and glaucoma. But worldwide, it's cataracts. Nearly 20 million people are unable to do the tasks of daily living because they have cataracts like what I just showed you. And then uncorrected refractive error is a huge, huge loss of income, children who can't thrive in school, and then mild infections that lead to a scarring of the cornea. When you look at the global burden of disease, eye disease is the 6th leading impediment to global progress. And blindness really perpetuates poverty. But at the same time, poverty really magnifies the suffering caused by sightlessness. It costs our world $4,300 billion a year. When you look at what intervention, the most efficacious intervention of anything in all of medicine is Al Summers' vitamin A capsules. But after that, QALY stands for quality adjusted life years. But cataract surgery is by far the most efficacious intervention. And the other, you know, I'm just people in a lot of these large funding agencies are not bringing the money. We could restore sight to all of those people who are blind from cataracts, but they say it's not a fatal disease, but it is. Once you go blind in the developing world, your life expectancy is 1/3 that of a age and health matched peer. So if you're a 70-year-old blind Nepali, your expected lifespan would be to 73. If you weren't blind, you'd live to be 79. But the other thing that doesn't get talked about is the collateral damage caused by a blind member of the family. Now, this is a child who will never go to school because he has to take care of his blind father and lead him around. And when we're looking at sort of calculating the impact of cataracts, it doesn't look at the lifetime earnings and loss of productivity of the child. And I said, here we don't have a lot of blindness. I mean, we have 3 per 1,000, but that's legally blind. And I mean, if you walk around the streets in Baltimore, you don't see a lot of people being led by guide dogs these days. You really don't see many people with white canes. You go to Addis Ababa, you'll see lots of people being led by sticks. And most of our blindness is unavoidable. It's from macular degeneration. And as people get older, they lose functioning of the central vision. But you don't go totally blind. You lose your central vision, but you still have peripheral vision and can walk around. This is what the retina looks like with, it's called atrophic macular degeneration. One of the largest charges to Medicare right now are injections for wet macular degeneration, where people are getting an injection every month. And we're doing quite well on them, looking at the genetics. And then when you look worldwide, the number 1 reason people have poor vision is just they don't have access to glasses. And then, cataracts and glaucoma is a tough disease. If you catch it early, we can do things to prevent it, but it's a difficult thing to catch. Then it's infectious blindness on the cornea, vitamin A deficiency in children. You see macular degeneration is relatively low on the world list. The one thing that's really coming up, which we're seeing a lot of, is diabetes and diabetic retinopathy. And that's going to become it's becoming a huge issue all over the world. But anyways, cataracts, this is what an absolute cataract looks like. And one of the things I'm also struggling with, and you're talking a few minutes about the programs we developed, so I came back to my residency thinking, wow, I want to get back and, work in Nepal. But one thing we found, particularly in India, where the quality has become really very, very good, the number of people who are unable to do the tasks of daily living and are blind is about 18 million. But if you start operating where we call people legally blind at 2,200, then it's about 60 million people. And if we start operating, 2060 is generous. Here at Stanford, I operate a lot of people with 20/40 vision. A lot of people have 20/20 in the right eye, and they're getting glare driving at night with 20/30 vision in the left, and they want me to do their cataract. And if we start operating at the 20/60 level, it's 8 times that number. But the really impactful thing is that a lot of people who are working, in America, most people have their cataract surgery when they're starting to struggle a little bit driving at night, well before it impacts their work. And if you start operating at that level in places like India, there's this burgeoning middle class that's very happy to pay $500 cash to have their cataract fixed. And the problem is that the absolute blind people are cocooned inside those who can pay. Glaucoma is a disease of pressure that's a little bit too high for the optic nerve, or it's associated with pressure too high. It's a loss of the nerve fibers of the optic nerve. Unfortunately, you don't feel any symptoms in the early stages. And by the time it's caught, it's often too late. And it's something we need somebody of your generation. Nobody of my generation or ahead has really figured out how to approach or deal with glaucoma in the developing world population. Corneal blindness, either from infections with trachoma. If you get a scratch cornea here in America, the cornea is the front window of the eye. It's a 5-layered structure, and it has very tight junctions in its epithelial top layer, and it also has the highest density of sensory pain fibers in the body. So it's very painful if you scratch the cornea. And there are only 4 bacteria that can get through an intact corneal epithelium. So if you have an infection around the eye, conjunctivitis, none of those can go into the eye and cause blindness, except there are just 4. There's one real important one that every doctor needs to know, and it'll certainly be on everybody's boards. Anybody know what the one bacteria that's important that goes through an intact corneal epithelium?
Acanthamoeba?
No, acanthamoeba is actually a parasite, and that doesn't go through an intact cornea. You need to have a scratch in the cornea, but it's a devastating disease. It's actually gonorrhea, and that's why Crédit in France developed the Crédit prophylaxis of giving silver nitrate, and now every baby that's born gets antibiotic ointment into their eye, because gonorrheal conjunctivitis will go right through the cornea and lead to permanent blindness. But because it's so painful, you get a little scratch in your cornea, you'll go to see the doctor, and they'll go to the emergency room, they'll give you an antibiotic, and it's no big deal. But worldwide, people have so many minor trauma and agricultural injuries, and it leads to scarring of the cornea. Trachoma is still a huge problem. It's a disease of poor water, a disease of poverty. These flies are spreading trachoma. It's in the secretions, and you get this very unpleasant follicular sort of germinal centers of T lymphocytes in the conjunctiva, and sort of very uncomfortable, pussy red eye that leads to scarring of your mucous membranes in the lid, which leads to the lashes rubbing on the cornea. And it's a very painful way to go blind. And it's still just absolutely devastating, endemic in northern Ethiopia, Chad, Mali, South Sudan. Ocular trauma, as I mentioned, leads to blindness. Onchocerciasis is river blindness. It's caused by a parasite that's spread by the bite of black flies that breed in slow-moving equatorial rivers. And we have actually, his father went blind. People go blind at a very young age from onchocerciasis. But there's a medication, it's called ivermectin, that is Merck's most profitable veterinary medicine. And Merck's giving out on an unlimited basis, but they just getting to the people who need it in places like, Democratic Republic of Congo or South Sudan or Sudan. Xerophthalmia's vitamin A deficiency, the cost of preventing this is called a Beto spot. And you get this drying of the surface of the cornea. You also have a decrease with loss of vitamin A of the turnover in your retinal photoreceptors. So when the first sign of vitamin A deficiency is night blindness. You'll be in a village, everybody will be happy and fun and playing, and the kids will be laughing, and at night they're just silent because they can't see. And then the cornea melts. And usually it's after having a diarrheal illness, or they'll get the measles, and that'll deplete the last of the vitamin A stores, and the cornea melts. Once that happens, game's over. We can't reconstruct that. But the cost to prevent blindness is 75 cents per child per year. And again, Al Summer was the one who was the instrumental in making these correlations. HIV blindness, I didn't really see much when I first started working in Africa. Anybody have any idea why? Even it was kind of the height of the HIV crisis when I started working in Africa, yet I didn't see a lot of HIV blindness, but now I do. Anybody have a theory on that? They died. When the AIDS crisis first hit in America, one of people's big fears were going blind, because people were getting treated for their pneumocystis carinii, pneumonia. They were getting treated for all the secondary infections, but the retinitis was something that they would stay alive, but with a very compromised immune system. When I started working in Africa, people were dying before they would go blind. But now we're giving antiretrovirals, but we're not doing it enough to get people to be Magic Johnson healthy. And so they're staying alive, but enough immune compromise that this is CMV, retinitis, and HIV. And then the big one, this is the really big thing coming on, is diabetic retinopathy. And it's just exponentially going up. When I first started working in Nepal, you never saw a gravitationally challenged person. People would, be walking. The diet was quite healthy. Now people have migrated to the cities, and there's a Krispy Kreme donut and a Kentucky Fried Chicken and a Wimpy Burger all on Durbar Mark now. And diabetic retinopathy is a huge problem here in the States, but it's going to be a huge problem worldwide. So anyways, I went back, did my residency, but then how do you actually go from having this vague concept, I want to come back and work in Nepal, to actually accomplishing anything? And I really owe pretty much most of my career to Sandak Ruit, who is my elder brother and the real genius behind anything I've been able to do. Sandak grew up in a little hill village, 3 days walk from the nearest road in far eastern Nepal, near the third highest mountain in the world, Kanchenjunga. And there was no electricity, no running water, and no schools. And when he was 8, he was involved in a cooking fire, and his dad brought him to a monastery, and the monks saw his energy and his brilliance, and they said, wow, this boy needs an education. And his father at age 8 walked him 11 days to Darjeeling, India, and he started his school. He had a brother and a sister who both died of very simple preventative public health problems. And he decided to become a doctor and became an ophthalmologist. He trained at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi, which is the premier institute in India, and then was back in Nepal. And he was noticed by Jan Koch, the same Dutch doctor who I watched, doing the cataract surgery, who brought him to the Netherlands to retrain. And then he met Fred Hollows, who was one of my big influences. And Fred brought him to Australia for 2 more years of training. And he was in his last month of training in Australia when I was looking in Kathmandu, seeing no one was doing modern eye surgery. So he came back to Australia the same year I started my residency to start trying to figure out how to deal with blindness in Nepal and teaching modern cataract surgery with lens implants. And this is Fred Hollows. He was a sort of a curmudgeonly Australian ophthalmologist who was at that time one of the very few prominent ophthalmologists really advocating teaching local people. Most of the programs were things like, the American Project Orbis, or a lot of religious-based programs, which involved having the Western doctor going over and doing the work and then leaving. And Fred was the first to really say, we really need to teach the local people to work. And one of his proteges was Hugh Taylor, who's my mentor, and I still call him Prof. Still one of my closest advisors and teachers. And he's the world's authority on infectious blindness, both onchocerciasis and trachoma, as a corneal surgeon in Melbourne. And I went and did my corneal fellowship with Hugh Taylor. By the way, Hugh had done his corneal fellowship at Hopkins, and he was part of the founding of the Dana Center for International Ophthalmology. And he was on faculty at Hopkins until he came back to take the chair in Melbourne, Australia. So I began writing to Fred Hollows when I was still a resident. I did my fellowship with Hugh Taylor. And near the end of my fellowship, he sent me to Nepal to work with Dr. Ruid. And Sonic had already developed this amazing system of mobilizing human resources and teaching and training at every level and having everybody work up to the very highest potential and no one doing anything that anyone with lesser skills could do. And I went over and I went on a outreach cataract program with him. It was sort of like a climbing expedition, but instead of having Sherpa partners, we had our partners were people like this. This is a woman who was nearly blind. These are those thick aphakic glasses, who walked for 4 days with her totally blind sister. And we were basically just looking for these absolute cataracts. And here you can see these thick Coke bottle-like glasses. And we would check the pupil, and it's one of the most important things you do. I always see one of the things kind of, especially in young doctors, always are writing PERLA, which would stand for pupils equal, round, reactive to light, and accommodation. Except nobody ever checks for accommodation. And it's not that easy to check for the pupil reaction to accommodation, but you still write PERLA. But the key thing is that when you shine the light into one pupil, it's a reflex arc that goes back to the pupil of both eyes. So when you shine the light in the right eye, both pupils should constrict exactly evenly. And if there's damage to the retina or the optic nerve, when you shine the light into the other eye, paradoxically, it'll appear to dilate, because basically just the amount of constriction depends on the amount of juice going through the system. So we look first for these absolute cataracts, just checking the pupil to see if the retina and optic nerve were functioning. And with copious use of betadine, Dr. Ruid had already brought the infection rate in the most remote places down to Western levels. And for 3 days, we operated side by side. We did 224 cataracts, all on these absolute cataracts. And one of Fred Hollows' last acts of genius, I didn't mention, but I was going to come to work with Fred, but he developed renal carcinoma during the final year of my residency. And he became too sick to work just a couple of months before I was coming to work with him. And so he pushed me off to Hugh Taylor. But his last act of genius was to sort of say, why should lens implants cost $300? Why can't we manufacture them in Nepal? And he raised the money in Australia to start the Fred Hollows Interocular Lens Factory, which instantly brought the cost of these lens replacements from $300 down to $6. And they're now about $2.50. And we can actually do a full cataract surgery with the total cost of disposables being $11 and the total cost of surgery about $25. And it all came from Fred Hollows really pushing for local manufacturing. And the real leaders on that front now are in India, a place called the Aravind Eye Hospital System down in Tamil Nadu. I'll get to that in a couple of seconds. Anyways, we operated, for 3 days, side by side, 224 cataracts. It sounds semi-impressive until you get the breakdown that Dr. Rui did 201 while I did 23. And what was more, I had to call Dr. Rui over to my table to help me probably 10 times because I had never seen cataracts like that during my fellowship or during my residency. And the joy was just palpable, not just the patients who could see, but also the whole families. And I went, wow, Dr. Rui, this is amazing. I want to come work with you. So I finished my fellowship in Australia and I came to work with Dr. Rui full time. How are we doing for time? Because I'm probably got about another 20 minutes of the talk left, and I want to give time for questions. Jimmy, is it okay if I just keep going with the talk? I got digressed on a few stories I didn't expect I'd tell.
I think we're all enjoying it, Dr. Tabin. So
Okay,
go right ahead.
So I came to Nepal, and Dr. Ray already set up this, as I said, this amazing system. This was my base hospital for 6 months. It's the Golcha Eye Hospital in Biratnagar, Nepal's second largest city in the south. And I was sort of struggling to learn Dr. Ruit's techniques. And a lot of the best minds in medicine, all the brilliant doctors at Hopkins and at Harvard and Stanford are all looking at how can we make care 1% better, even if it's 100% more expensive. And Dr. Rui, and to some extent my career, has been focused on how can we deliver 100% the same quality at a cost that's affordable to the poorest countries on earth. And after a few years in Nepal, we started initially just training young doctors to do cataract surgery. Then we took some of our best cataract surgeons, sent them for subspecialty fellowships. And then once we had a full component of subspecialists, we started a full residency program. We began working in Tibet. And as we began to expand into Bhutan, the health minister of Bhutan said, so you want to train our doctors? Do you also train doctors in America? And I actually hadn't. I just come straight to Nepal for my training. And then the other factor was as we were training more doctors and trying to buy microscopes, buy slit lamps, I was kind of getting ignored by the ophthalmic pharmaceutical world. And it was sort of like, what is he doing living in Biratnagar, Nepal? He probably is running from a felony or he couldn't pass the American boards. So Dr. Rui and I decided to come back and teach an American residency program and be able to do more to support things. So I came back to the University of Vermont and we started a 501c3, the Himalayan Cataract Project, really focused on how do we change blindness through the education in really establishing a system of care and really the infrastructure needed to have it continue. We had a economic model of cost recovery. It's been referred to as compassionate capitalism, where the paying patients subsidize the free care. And we began sort of looking at expanding through not just Nepal, but also the adjacent countries. But at that time, there was a backlog of 250,000 people blind from cataracts in Nepal, and about 50,000 new people going blind a year. And still, Nepali doctors were only doing about 15,000 a year. So it seemed like it would be a lifetime just to get the handle on cataracts in Nepal, let alone also Bhutan, Tibet, mountainous northern India, northern Pakistan. And again, the whole focus was really on training, teaching, empowering the local doctors, but also teaching at all levels. This is one of the other geniuses of Dr. Rui. It wasn't just training doctors. It was training ophthalmic assistants in a 6-month course after 8th grade, training ophthalmic technicians in a 3-year program after high school at Kathmandu University, a year's program for ophthalmic nursing. We set up an optometry program. And then, as I mentioned, a full world-class residency. And then as we began to have more subspecialists, having subspecialty training in Nepal. and sort of ongoing mentoring. But it's really that public health and basic level of the ophthalmic assistants, ophthalmic technicians, and ophthalmic nursing that's really the backbone of our program. And now, not only the other things, Dr. Wu is so far the best trained and leader of the ophthalmology community in Nepal. We really kind of bring everyone together and have everybody working together. And we also brought in all of the international NGOs that were working in the same sphere. We created great alliances with the Yerevan Eye Hospital system, which is probably the best development eye system, really maybe medical system in the world. It's out of Tamil Nadu, India. Also the LV Prasad Eye Hospital system in Hyderabad, the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi, and then all of these sort of big international NGOs. And so we'd be able to really create a very focused way of dealing with things in Nepal. And then also a way to start really doing very high volume surgery at a very low cost with very high quality. And I don't know how many of you have watched surgery at Wilmer, but when I operate at Stanford, they'll let me do 16 cataracts in a day. In Nepal, in Africa, I'll often do 100 cataracts in a day. And we use very expensive equipment. We use sometimes lasers to make our incisions. We have a phacoemulsification machine that breaks up the lens that costs well over $150,000 now, that has incredible technology and fluidics to keep the eye inflated. This is all low tech. This is the $25 cataract surgery. And this is a real time. You can see this is not edited. So you can see the timing here in the corner. And what Dr. Rui developed was a way to make a self-sealing incision that was as stable as this tiny little incision we make for phacoemulsification, and a way to bring out the whole lens in a way that was incredibly gentle to the eye and very, very safe. And this is opening, the lens is kind of like a peanut M&M, and it's sort of an outer candy shell. It's actually has more the consistency of the skin of a grape. And then it has the chocolatey mass is called the cortex, and the hard peanut is the nucleus. And what you want to see here, we're at 1 minute and 30 seconds into this video, but you can see up here in this yellow box, the next patient is being positioned for the next surgery. Now that's the hard peanut. It's just been mobilized. We're going to bring it out. So we're about 1 minute and 43 seconds of live time in surgery. And Yerevan Eye Hospital Systems has an overall manufacturing facility now called Oralab. And at Oralab, they have a kit that gives you your preoperative dilating drops, preoperative antibiotic. You have a drape that is better than the very expensive drape I used all day today from the Alcon company. You have all 3 blades to make these 3 incisions. You have the viscoelastic jelly to keep the eye formed. You have a blue dye called trypan blue that stains the lens. You have the lens implant, and this is a lens implant manufactured at Yerevan Eye Hospital. It's now currently costing $3 for this lens implant. And it's measured to give the patient just perfect vision. So this patient, it's like having your pair of glasses. And we have the same checks and balances that you'll have at Hopkins or we have at Stanford, except we have people who are just looking at just the checks and balances, it's the proper lens implant. See, we're 3 minutes to this surgery, but here, this next patient is prepped and draped, and they'll have the speculum in. So this surgery is just finishing at 3 minutes and 12 seconds. And the surgeon, this is Dr. Venkatesh from Yerevan, all he does is wipe his gloves with absolute alcohol, a new sterile tray, and less than 3 seconds later, the next case is starting. And so with this system, some of the surgeons in Nepal are doing as many as 12 surgeries an hour. And I often will do 10 surgeries an hour with this system. because the patient is prepped, draped, ready, and all set to go, and the new instruments are ready. And it really is a team effort. The patients are fully prepared by ophthalmic technicians, by the nurses. They've had all their calculations. And so we began kind of publishing. This was around 2000, some of these high volume techniques. This is now putting in the stain to open the capsule of the lens. So there's the trypan blue going in. And we began publishing, that we were doing, restoring sight, to many hundreds of people in a few days. And most of the Western establishment were kind of skeptical. And they thought maybe Dr. Tabin is doing fast surgery, but it's cheap and it's not the same quality. So the thing that really kind of changed things was I was able to bring one of my partners in the global ophthalmology sphere, who's kind of the head. He's now the head of the cataract section for the American Academy of Ophthalmology, named David Chang. And we brought David Chang over to Nepal, and American Medical Optics recreated his California operating suite with the fanciest phacoemulsification machine and fanciest microscope and all the same instruments. And we did sort of a head-to-head prospective randomized trial of phacoemulsification with our manual technique. It was sort of my personal version of the Iron Chef, but our secret ingredient was the absolute cataract. And Dr. Chang's an amazing surgeon. He was doing the phaco, and Dr. Rui was doing the sutureless extracapsular surgery. And David's an amazing surgeon. He had about 80% of his patients seeing well enough to pass the driver's test post-op day one. But Dr. Rui was 91%. And when you looked at the results at 12 months, either corrected or uncorrected, there was no result from no statistical difference from 2030 outwards. There's a statistical difference with better outcomes to 2020 and 2025 with the phaco. But it slowly began to be established. Dr. Rui demonstrated, it was 2004, he went to the All India Ophthalmology meeting, and he demonstrated his surgery, and it began spreading in India, and it's now the most commonly performed surgery in Africa, India, and most of South Asia. This is our new hospital. We have a full world-class eye center in Kathmandu. We started an eye bank. I'm a corneal transplant specialist. That's sort of dear to my heart. And when we started the eye bank, we weren't getting any donations because people didn't want their loved ones to be blind in their reincarnation. So Dr. Rui had the genius to say, well, why don't, instead of having doctors asking for the donations at hospitals, let's have the Hindu priests and Buddhist monks asking for the donation right before the bodies are cremated. And so we have the only temple-based eye bank in the world. It's one of the most successful ones in South Asia. And then we've been really looking at how do we reach the unreached. And we have, populations often very remote, and we have these primary eye care centers that are staffed by the ophthalmic assistants, ophthalmic technicians, and then we have that feeding into regional eye hospitals, and then we have our training centers of excellence. And some very high volume hospitals in the south of Nepal. And it's a little hard to read, but Nepal is the only large, poor country that's actually reversed its rate of blindness. In 1984, there was nearly 1% of the population was blind. And by 2012, the prevalence was down to 0.35. And I'm sure it's down to about 0.2 now. And I'll go to the most remote areas of Nepal now. And a typical patient, when, I started working with Dr. Rui, if you could see to count my fingers at 4 feet, you'd say, oh, your vision's pretty good, Grandma. Maybe you'll come back next year. Whereas now we have patients who are walking for 3 days, who are seeing 20/30 in their right eye, having had cataract surgery 2 years ago, and they want to have their 20/40 cataract fixed in their left eye. And anyways, Nepal's gone from 15,000 cataract surgeries a year to over 300,000. And we're now using Nepal as one of our main training bases for doctors from Africa. Started working in Tibet in 1997. Huge burden of cataracts. Partially the high altitude sunlight causes oxidative damage to the lens of the eye, but also a lack of antioxidants in the diet, and also quite a bit of genetics. This is a woman who had never seen her children crying, seeing her baby for the first time. We moved into Bhutan, as I mentioned, in 1999. They have this wonderful development strategy and the attitude of they want to realize the gross national happiness of their people, not necessarily the gross national product. They had a great already infrastructure of schools and roads and public health that we've dovetailed the eye program with. This is Dr. Kunzang Getchin, the lead ophthalmologist of Bhutan, and that's been our other biggest success story. And we have a basic health unit in every village. We've been training the village health workers to recognize eye disease and created this wonderful screening and public health way of dealing with it. But the place that still is just a disaster is Africa. When you look where there's blindness by region, you see Africa's this huge bloated continent along with South Asia. But when you look at where there are doctors, it's just a shriveled little tail. And what's even worse is that there's a even greater lack of high quality paramedical professionals, the ophthalmic technicians, ophthalmic nurses, optometrists. It's just a very low paying occupation. It just is not attracting the same great people that are going into ophthalmic nursing or being ophthalmic technicians in Nepal or India. There's also a lot more infectious blindness in Africa. So one of the things that really helped fuel our success in Asia was that 90% of the blindness was from cataracts. And the other biggest cause of low vision, there's a lot of nearsightedness, was people who just needed glasses. And even the poorest of the poor will pay a little bit. They'll pay a month's salary to have a cataract surgery or a few dollars to have glasses for their children. And if you took a blind family member to an eye doctor in Nepal, you had a 90% chance of a miracle. Whereas in Africa, there's a lot more infectious blindness. There's a lot more glaucoma. There's a lot more vascular and diabetic blindness. And cataracts are a little less than 50% of the blindness in Africa. So if you take the day out from the fields and you walk your blind father for 2 days to get to a facility, you have less than a 50-50 chance of a miracle. And it's sort of like if you go to a restaurant and you have a bad meal, you'll tell lots of people. You have a good meal, you don't tell quite as many people. And so we've had a lot of trouble just getting that sustainability. But the joy is still there. This is one of my other mentors and heroes, Alan Crandall. I was at the University of Vermont for 10 years, and then I went to the University of Utah for 10 years, largely to work with Alan Crandall, who's one of the early heroes of eye care in Africa, and this is in Ghana. Unfortunately, died too soon, but the joy is just, it's hard to describe. People have been totally blind, and especially when they don't expect to see, and then they see. And so our first big program was in Ghana, and our focus again is still on that same transferring what was so successful in Asia with creating training facilities. And Ethiopia was our second big program. And we've now expanded working in South Sudan, Tanzania. Rwanda is one of the better success stories in Africa. It's a smallish country, and the sort of benign dictator, Paul Kagame, has been really supporting our program. But it really is just such a wonderful field. And even though the statistics are still fairly overwhelming, that we have 18 million people who are blind from treatable cataracts, the kind of cool thing is these people are no longer a statistic. After cataract surgery, they're 100% cured. And eye care is one of the very few areas where you really do cure people 100%. And Helen Keller said, because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do something I can do. And overcoming needless blindness is something we can do. And I'm hoping that somebody like Bill Gates or a Mark Zuckerberg will kind of step up and go, wow, I could be the person who completely eliminates all needless blindness on Earth. And the cost to completely eliminate all needless blindness is somewhere under $10 billion, which, I mean, to me, $10 billion is a lot. But if you look at how much money we're wasting on the military, again, I don't want to get political in my talk, but if we would have taken what we spent every week in our war in Iraq and Afghanistan, we could have cured every single blind person in Afghanistan with what we spent every week on the war. And we certainly would have had a lot more friends. And 10 billion in the scheme of things, we could restore sight to every single person blind with cataracts. But in the short run, just the joy, taking someone who's like this, or like this, or like this. And some of our high volume cataract programs will often do 300 surgeries in a day with 5 or 6 surgeons working. We'll have 2 or 3 training resident doctors. And there's like this hesitation when they're seeing what they see, and then just this incredible joy. And I've been doing this for about 30 years, and I still get excited going to postoperative day 1 every day. Okay, well, I'll stop there and answer any questions as long as you guys would like. And I'm sorry I went on a little bit long. I kind of got diverted into a few stories.
No, thank you for the beautiful talk, Dr. Tabin. So as Dr. Tabin mentioned, if anyone on the call wants to ask a question, if you can just raise your hand, I think Dr. Tabin will be able to.
Yeah, I can't see that many people. I'm not sure what's wrong with my screen, but I only see I see Annabelle, Shruti, Ellison, and James. That's all I see. So I'm not sure how to. There are 52 participants, but I don't know how to see everybody.
It may be in your view in the top right corner.
Top right
Is
corner.
there, if you go on view and.
I don't see, I see a view in the left. Let's see, manage participants. It's not, I'm not really finding that. I've got a participant list on the right.
I think
We can go ahead and just call out
Why don't you
whoever
just
raises
call
their
out,
hand.
because I'm only seeing 4 people at a time.
Sounds good. Hopefully
I think
when
people raise their hands, it should show up for you,
exactly
Dr.
with their
Tabin.
camera on. Marina, did you have a question? Did you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Tabin, for this very inspiring talk. So I'm a 4th year at McGovern. I'm applying right now. I have to do some form of medical mission like you were describing. And something that I've been wondering is if our program doesn't have an explicit mention of small incision cataract surgery or actual trips abroad in low resource places, how do you recommend we obtain that sort of training so that we can make this practical?
You don't need to. It's something, the surgery is not that easy. Actually, phaco is a lot easier. And you want to just be the best ophthalmologist you can be. If you want to make this part of your career, there are several global ophthalmology fellowships now for post-residency that really will prepare you for a career in global ophthalmology. But really, the first thing is, they made a great decision going to ophthalmology. And the first thing is just to become a great ophthalmologist, to be a really good, caring, compassionate doctor and a good surgeon. And to become really knowledgeable in all areas of ophthalmology and being able to treat, evaluate everything and being a great ophthalmologist. And then there's so much to do. There's need in every subspecialty of ophthalmology. And with time, if it's something you want to do and make a major part of your career, there's plenty of time to learn to be a really great cataract surgeon. But the first thing is to become a really great, compassionate doctor, become a really great ophthalmologist, really knowledgeable ophthalmologist. And then those skills will come later. And having a program, going to Guatemala, the one thing it does is it fires you up. You see that joy and it'll kind of inspire you. If your program has a program, like all our Stanford residents have funded 3 weeks to go on a trip with me, and they see it, and they'll do 10 or 15 sutureless extracapsular cataract surgeries, but their skill level is not going to be that different from a program who doesn't. And someone, takes a few hundred cases before you become really quite good at this technique. So it's something that, having that program as part of your residency can kind of like fuel your desire and keep you psyched. Don't, keep the passion high, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, at this stage, getting into any ophthalmology program is what you need to do.
Tam, I think I see
And,
you.
and then, and I kind of look at it also, where do you want to live? Because where you're going to live for 4 years. And then, what is the atmosphere like? Do you like do you feel like you fit in with the people? Are they happy? Or if you're miserable, you want to be around other miserable people. I mean, you want to be in an environment that seems to suit you. And I wouldn't worry about those specifics of the program.
Thank you.
Are you interviewing with, well, maybe I'll see you again. I recognize your face. I'm on the committee at Stanford. So if you are interviewing at Stanford, we can talk more about it. We'll have one-on-one time.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for talking tonight. It's been really, really fun. One thing that you talked about was some of the changes with causes of vision problems, and you mentioned having diabetes and the complications around that. I'm curious about other changes that you see happening in the coming decades in the field.
There's been so many advances, and so much in sort of genetics and things that will, prevent disease. I think, the one that we really need to have more progress on is glaucoma. Diabetes, it's a huge public health issue, and it's something that in ophthalmology, we're just unable to keep up with, especially in low resource countries. Right now in all of Ethiopia, 120 million people, there's one doctor doing free vitreoretinal care for poor people. And the diabetes is just going through the roof. I'm hoping, that there'll be, progress, but as the populations are aging and people are living longer, the backlog of cataracts, even though we're doing better and better, especially in Africa, the population is so young that, there's going to be a lot of the disease. And if you go into ophthalmology, you're not going to be bored in your lifetime. You'll have plenty of work both in America and around the world.
Is it Navindi? See you next.
Hello. Thank you so much. You're so inspirational. I'm actually a pre-optometry student. I've been working as a optician and a ophthalmic technician for the longest time. And I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to partner with you in your missions trip.
Enormous. And again, I don't like using the word missions trips because I don't think I ever go on a missions trip. Every trip I go on, it's always teaching and empowering and developing local resources. But to be an optometrist and an optician, there is so much need, and to go and embed yourself and teach, there are so many places that there's a huge lack of optometrists. And then even if somebody gets a prescription for glasses, there's no opticians and it's impossible to get glasses. And so, and it's one of those other areas that, if you become very good, it can be very financially rewarding. And again, in Nepal and India, There's been a lot of success and sustainability through selling spectacles. But, I think absolutely we could absolutely use your resources. Now, where are you from originally? You have a little bit of an accent.
Sri Lanka.
From Sri Lanka. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much you can do in Sri Lanka, but so
I
much.
was just in Sri Lanka doing a doing a little vision screening camp uh, at their main prison, and I just came back from Guatemala this past year with VHI. So I'm just looking.
I would say the first thing you have to go ahead and become an optometrist. The better you're trained, the more skills you have, the more you can contribute. So
Got
someone who has that double threat of being both an optician or triple threat of being a technician, optician, and optometrist, there's enormous need, and you can do incredible good for the country, for the world. So thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you.
Stephanie?
Okay. Hi, Dr. Tabin. Good evening. It's such a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I first found out about you when I was actually first introduced to ophthalmology when I read the book Second Sons that detailed both you and Dr. Rui's work. And my question for you is really on the role of advocacy. So, in terms of like the role that you play or like any global ophthalmologist plays and like advocating for policies to improve healthcare access worldwide. It's like advocating for increased funds that can go to countries that really need these life-saving surgeries. How can ophthalmologists or even residents or medical students like get involved in that advocacy space and like talk to policymakers, Congress, etc., and bringing that issue to light?
Let's have you in America, there are a lot more channels for advocacy. And the place that I'm more frustrated are places like Africa. Now, in India and Nepal, things have developed without much help from the governments, but without much hindrance. So we had no government really blocking us, and at least verbal, lip support from the government for everything we were doing, and no hindrance, and a lot of help in terms of having import duties for equipment coming in waived for free patients, and a lot of things that the governments have done to support it. And India in particular has done a really good job. Africa has been much more difficult, and all of the health ministries are really they've been just depleted, and the ongoing emphasis on meeting the metrics of the WHO for child mortality, maternal mortality, HIV, tuberculosis. And then on top of that, COVID was just absolutely devastating. But even what happened, sort of anytime there's any sort of Western idea on things, it really kind of forces what the local health ministries are doing. And the only sub-Saharan African country that's really applying any sort of emphasis on eye care is Rwanda. And it's just really tough. And there have been some very bad policy. So most of the advocacy work that I do is trying to convince the government of Ghana or the government of Ethiopia that they shouldn't mandate that there are 3 times as many ophthalmology residents without having any sort of salary for the faculty or access to patients. And that, I mean, this is a huge topic. I mean, we could talk for several hours about it. But advocacy is a really important thing. Unfortunately, most of the American Academy of Ophthalmology advocacy programs are really more revolving around reimbursement and how can we keep the income of ophthalmologists high, and dealing with sort of Medicare and Medicaid issues. And I think there needs to be more emphasis on advocacy of how do we provide the care for everyone.
Thank you so much.
And hopefully we'll meet in person. Well, what year are you? What year?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm a second year.
Okay, well, hopefully in a couple of years you'll be applying in ophthalmology, and I'm sure our paths will cross in the future.
I sure hope so too.
Perfect. We'll do 3 more questions just out of respect for everyone's time. Annabelle, you're next.
Hi, Dr. Tabin. I was wondering if I could ask about how you balance everything. I recently was balancing like choosing whether to go on a climbing trip or like make sure that I was back in time for an interview that started on Monday morning. And I ended up deciding to go with the interview. But I imagine that in your life, you've also had to make this decision to the nth degree. So I was
Yeah,
wondering,
well, again,
like in terms of global.
I'll go back to don't ration your passion. But I made decisions earlier in my life that I haven't made since. I mean, I still like to climb. I'm actually going to go to Yosemite this weekend and
Nice.
do a couple of routes, but I haven't gone on anything really major since I went back into ophthalmology. I really haven't taken any.
Mm.
I haven't actually taken any extended vacations. I've spent all my vacation time working in Africa and Asia. And,
Right. I was
and,
wondering that in terms
and
just how
I spent about 3 to 4 months of the year doing that now.
that's
And
that's
in terms of balance, that's again that would be a nice longer discussion that I'd be happy to, go into, and I'm happy to stay on the call a little bit longer. But I've had more in terms of just family. The people who are close to you are so important, and somehow my kids have turned out to be really nice people. But they didn't think, oh gosh, Dad's curing 1,000 blind people in Ethiopia. They just thought Dad missed my 6th birthday party. And those sorts of, balances. I'm very fortunate that, my wife's an incredible person, and so be able to kind of hold things together uh, when I'm gone. But, though that balance of the time with my kids. My kids are now 26 and 24. And a lot of their events and milestones that I missed because I was in Africa or Asia. And, I drag my kids. I used to take them out of school and bring them with me, which they didn't always want to do at the time. And I think, in terms of, climbing, that was kind of an easier thing because you can always squeeze in a little bit. And then, having a huge opportunity, hey, do you want to get paid $20,000 to guide a trip up the highest mountain in Antarctica? Yeah, okay, I'll go do that. And so,
Yeah.
at the time I was making those decisions, rather than continuing in an orthopedic residency, I didn't have that passion and joy. I didn't like being in X-ray rounds at 6 a.m, having been up all night in the ER and realizing I'm going to have to spend another 12 hours at the hospital. And just the hierarchical nature of my orthopedic program, I wasn't as excited and passionate. So I was able to be enticed by something that I was really excited about. And since I went back into ophthalmology, I've been so excited about it. I still, like I said, I tingle before post-ops. I actually have a couple of really cool cases tomorrow. I'm excited about my surgery tomorrow morning. And I'm excited about my post-ops from today that I'll be seeing tomorrow afternoon. So it's, I think finding what you love, and it's easier, and just sort of, that don't ration the passion.
Okay, thank you.
Sonia?
Hi, Dr. Tabin. I'm Sonia. I'm a 3rd-year medical student at Drexel. Thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences. I had 2 questions that I was hoping you could touch on briefly. So first, what are the main social or cultural barriers you might have faced with cataract surgery in the regions where you were working, and then how did your team address these? And then also, how did your work with the Himalayan Cataract Project influence your approach to ophthalmology in more developed countries?
The first question is easy because people ask me that there are no barriers. Nobody wants to be blind. Nobody. And I mean, there's no place on earth that I've been that they're somebody can benefit from cataract surgery and you're offering that service. The thing that drives the demand is quality, and you have to have quality. And but in terms of social barriers, it's until you start establishing a track record and show that people, it's going to move a little bit out of the sun, until we would go to places and people wouldn't want to take the day off the field to lead a blind grandmother to a facility. But as soon as they saw that their neighbor's mom is seeing perfectly and back to cooking and back to life, there's just no hesitation. So, and then in terms of, I actually enjoy I get frustrated a little bit. Economically, it's very difficult to do free surgery in America. I get more frustrated with some of the economic issues. You have a 53-year-old barber who doesn't quite qualify for Medi-Cal, who's got 4 kids, who can't work because they have a cataract, and I can't bring in a cataract at Stanford for less than $6,000. And there's just there's so many things in our American medical system that are very frustrating. And the amount of time that, I waste on the Epic system on the computer and, things that I do that are not, I really love working overseas because all I do is focus on absolute best patient care and teaching residents, teaching fellows. And a lot of the things that suck up a lot of your time in America, I feel more energized after a 10-hour day of doing 80 cataract surgeries in Ethiopia than I do after a 7-hour day doing 15 cataracts at Stanford. But I like it all, and I like the people. I like the fact that in America I can really get to know my patients, and the pace of care and the longitudinal way you stay with your patients. And it's in some ways kind of refreshing to be able to really take the time to deal with a very complex corneal problem, where in a very high volume, low resource setting with few doctors, we're slowly getting to the point where we can give that same quality of care. I don't know, that's a little bit of a rambling answer, but
I had Luke up next.
Thanks, Rizzy. Thank you for the talk, Dr. Tabin. My name is Luke. I'm in med school at the University of Miami. So, one thing I've kind of been curious and like brainstorming about, because I had a business background before coming into medicine, and I thought a lot about like the economics of what you're talking about, right? And you brought up, the payments with cataract surgeries. And one thing that initially got me thinking about this was I heard Dr. Levinson, I think it was, who
Geoff Levinson.
Exactly. Yeah. So Geoff, he was talking on something that I was listening to about something that you mentioned too, which is that cataracts inhibit people from working more than a lot of other diseases, and you can get people back to work a lot quicker, and you can actually improve the income of a family living in a remote place by having the older males in the family undergo cataract surgery, and now they can get back to work, right? So, and it brings a lot of income. You talked a lot about like these countries like Nepal where there isn't enough surgeons, but what do you think about, countries that have a lot of gap to where, like maybe like Brazil, where there's more than enough ophthalmologists, but you have large areas and large poverty areas where there's people who are maybe even living down the street from an eye hospital, but they don't have the money to have cataract surgery. Are there any like like a loan assistance programs or
There's
programs that have
nothing
been
there's nothing
piloted?
that's really worked. And
Yeah.
it's such a multifactorial problem. If it were easy,
Mhm.
we would have solved it. I need people who are smarter than me, like you, to come in and solve this sort of thing. One of the other things that I didn't touch on, which is sort of a corollary of what you're talking about, is the financial reimbursement for the doctors.
Yeah.
One thing that happened in Nepal, and we've seen it in places in India, where doing very, very high volume surgery with the people paying what they can and paying patients paying more, and creating a system where the doctors get paid quite well and are doing a very high volume of surgery. And they, to the woman who asked about doing suturous extra caps, if you're doing 3,000 or 4,000 a year, you become a very, very good surgeon. And after 5, 6, 10 years working in a very high volume program, then you have the skills that you can very successfully open a private practice. And ophthalmology is one of the very highly reimbursed specialties in Nepal, in India. And so we have the absolute best graduates competing to go into ophthalmology. Dr. Roy's kind of a national hero in Nepal. And that model, and as I mentioned, Nepal, we really have reversed the rate of blindness, and we really are reaching that, disenfranchised and poor population. But a lot of places, a lot of places in Africa, we've not created that reimbursement model, and people are, ophthalmologists are just charging wealthy patients and not doing anything for the poor. South America is a huge example of that. I mean, Bolivia, in La Paz, they're great doctors. But if you go into the Altiplano, you have so many people who are blind from cataracts. And the local doctors have a resistance to having outsiders come in and do surgery, because when you go and do free surgery in the Altiplano, a certain number of people from La Paz will go, whoa, I get free surgery? An American doctor is going to do it for me? And so people who would pay to have the Bolivian doctor do it are now sneaking in for the free surgery. And in a place like South Sudan, where right now there are 3 ophthalmologists in country right now for 16 million people, they're just so excited if I can figure out a way to train more doctors. So we have a doctor from South Sudan training in Uganda, one in Kenya, one in Rwanda, and we're looking for more training programs. Bolivia doesn't want you to do that. And, and then if people are trained, are they just going to come back to La Paz and compete for the same, patient who's going to pay them $600 for a cataract?
Yeah,
and
so it sounds like
convince someone that they should work an 8-9 hour day doing 40 or 50 cataracts in a day, and 20 of them are free, when they can make the same income operating on 8 patients a day, all who pay. It's
so
sort of human nature. You go to, you go to college, you go to medical school, you train as an ophthalmologist, and as you talk about advocacy, one of the issues I've been dealing with a little bit in Ghana with advocacy is the government decide, well, people aren't going to the remote areas. So anyone who goes to an ophthalmology residency that we support for 4 years, they have to give us 4 years back in a remote area. And, these are often people in their 30s, they have children, they have a spouse, and they don't want to live in a remote area. And so that decreases the quality of the applicants who are going into ophthalmology, which sort of decreases that whole kind of ecosystem. There are so many economic issues surrounding how do we, and every country is different.
Yeah, thank you.
Galila?
Hi, yes. Galila, hi. Thank you so much. This is honestly perfect timing for me. I'm a med student also from University of Miami. I think you're a different class than me, Luke. But yeah. So I actually got introduced to the entire field of ophthalmology through, I don't know if you know Dr. Michael Fellmeyer. He goes on a lot of trips.
He was my fellow.
Okay. There you go. So I know him.
He was my first combined cornea global fellow at the University of Utah.
Okay, that's amazing. I got introduced to the field of ophthalmology because my family's from Ethiopia, and so he brought some local doctors from Ethiopia to stay with my family, and so I honestly have a lot to thank for my interest in the field to you. So yeah, thank you for your work. Funny enough, I'm going to Ethiopia next week with Matt Oliva and Dr. Fellmeyer. And so we're going to go to the Harar. And I just wanted to ask, kind of coming in as a medical student, what kind of things can I prepare, practical ways to help?
Just you're gonna have such a Harar is so gorgeous, and the patients there are so happy, and there's such joy. And yeah, Matt actually started working with me when he was a medical student.
Oh, wow.
And he's just taken over as chairman of our board. And as I said, Mike was my first global fellow. And you're going to have a great time. There's, as a medical student, you just sort of see where you can help. There's so many things. When we work in Nepal, even from the very start, we never really had need for a lot of ancillary help because we had the ophthalmic technicians, ophthalmic nurses who were so well trained. And then everybody wanted to volunteer to help the blind people. And that sort of spirit of volunteerism is less prevalent in Africa. And so there's so much to do and so much to help out on. And so it's, you'll see it's a whole flow system of examining the patients, cleaning them, preparing them, doing the biometry, calculating the lens implant, making sure the right lens implant goes with the right patient. And then, and then the post-operative period, having, there's so many. What year medical student are you?
I'm a third year, so I'm currently doing a research
I
year.
have a lot of really close friends at Bascom. That's a phenomenal place and a phenomenal program. But no, you're gonna have a great time. So yeah, let them know that that you had to suffer through one of my lectures.
I will. No, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
And actually, as soon as I get off the phone, I'm actually going to be, well, to tell me your name again, because I'm going to be calling Matt as soon as I get off the phone. So
Oh yeah, it's
as soon as I'm done with
Galila.
this Zoom.
Oh,
What's your-
perfect. Galila, Gelila, and last name Johannes, Y-O.
Yeah, I got it. I got it.
Perfect.
Well, you have an amazing time. And
Awesome.
it's just going to stoke your fires. I mean, it's just going to totally blow you away and realize how much you can do.
Yeah, this talk was perfect timing for me. So thank you so much.
And it was another really fantastic doctor. I think she spoke in this series is Dr. Fasika Wareta.
Yes,
At Hopkins. And we have actually, I had a fellow 2 years ago, we kept on faculty at Stanford, Bethany McConan, who, unfortunately, because of the politics in Ethiopia right now, people aren't really going back. But,
exactly. Yeah.
And
And
a good cohort of great American-trained Ethiopian physicians. So hopefully a few of you will come back and raise the quality.
yeah, we hope so too. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Maybe one more question?
Well, yeah, perfect. We'll take our last question of the night from Adam.
Are there a lot of people raising their hand?
I think that's the last one. So perfect timing as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, Dr. Tabin. I am in a master's of public health year between my third and fourth years at the University of Cincinnati. And I'm just wondering, for me and for anyone else interested in public health that's on the call, what sort of skills do you think we can build from a public health standpoint now to help us do some of the work that you've done in your career?
Well, so much. I mean, public health is really absolutely critical in all kind of global health. In ophthalmology, more than just about anything, and so just, figuring out how to, reach populations, influence populations, developing infrastructure, realizing what are quality programs to be supported, what are less quality. I mean, there's just so much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a whole world to explore.
Cincinnati has a great ophthalmology program too. So
I'm really enjoying it here, definitely.
So I don't know if you knew Dr. Golnick.
Yes. Dr. Golnick was fantastic. He gave the best lectures.
Yeah, he's working with me. We're doing a lot together on sort of residency education evaluation.
That's awesome.
Global ophthalmology. He's living in Arizona, but
Yeah.
he established stuff and.
I wonder, did Dr. Kelly work on that too? I know she's huge into resident medical student evaluation.
I don't know Dr. Kelly.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. And anything else? Well, it was nice talking to you. I'm sorry I rambled on so much.
No,
Jimmy,
thank you.
Jimmy got you got me started on the bungee jumping thing, and then I
you can blame me for that, Doc. But sincerely, thank you, Dr. Tabin. This was, I mean, I think you can just see the wonderful questions we had. People really loved your talk. So thank you for being with us tonight. So I will. Oh yes. I'm just seeing Travis, but yeah, I wanted to share just for everyone who's still on the call, our website. And then we also have our Instagram. So for people, so they can see what keep an eye out for the next speaker. But so have a good night, everyone. And again, to Dr. Tabin, thank you so much for being with us.